My name is Emma, and I'm about to tell you something I've never shared with anyone else. I'm 23 years old now, but what I'm about to recount happened when I was just 13. It's the story of the night I realized the world isn't what I thought it was, the night I learned that monsters are real. I still don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened, but it changed me forever. At 13, I was just a regular, happy kid. I had my friends, my art, my dreams. I wasn't the best student, but I could get lost in a sketchbook for hours. I loved seeing beauty in places other people didn't like the way the light played on the walls in the morning, or how the rain made the world outside seem soft and quiet. I would sit by my window, pencil in hand, drawing the world around me as it was, and sometimes as I wished it to be. My life was simple, full of those little things that made it feel like everything was going to be okay. As for my dad, has been gone for as long as I can remember. I was just a kid when he got sick, his strength slowly drained away, and with it, he faded from my life. I don't remember the man he was before he was ill. All I have are the fragments of memories of him lying in bed, his body so frail it was like watching someone slowly slip through my fingers. My mom tried her best to fill the space he left behind. She never let me feel alone, even though I could see the weight in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't easy for her, but she was everything I had, and I loved her more than anything. Sometimes, when I caught her staring out the window, her eyes so distant, I'd wonder if she was remembering Dad, or if she was just tired of pretending everything was fine. I felt guilty sometimes, enjoying life when she was so burdened. It all started like any ordinary evening. I was in my room upstairs, doing my homework. The soft hum of crickets drifted in through the open window, mixing with the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen downstairs. I was doodling in my notebook, more focused on avoiding my history assignment than actually finishing it. That's when I heard her voice.
"Emma, dinner's ready,"
My mom called. Her voice was so clear, so normal, that I didn't think twice about it. I stretched, closed my textbook, and got up, ready to head downstairs. But as I reached for my bedroom door, something appended. I didn't hear it coming. Hands grabbed my shoulders from behind, rough and trembling, and before I could even scream, I was yanked backward into the laundry room by the staircase. The door slammed shut behind us, plunging the room into near darkness.
"Emma, don't make a sound."
A voice whispered in my ear. I struggled, heart pounding, until I recognized the voice. It was my mom, or at least it looked like her. "Mom?" I whispered. My eyes adjusted to the dim light seeping through the crack beneath the door, and I saw her face. But something was wrong. Her skin was pale, her eyes bloodshot and swollen, like she'd been crying for hours. Her whole body was trembling.
"Don't go down there, honey,"
she whispered, her voice breaking.
"I heard it too."
Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My brain raced to make sense of what she meant. She heard it too? But wasn't it her who had just called me? I didn't have time to think. Outside the door, a loud creak echoed from the staircase. Someone or something was moving. Mom put a finger to her lips, her watery eyes pleading with me to stay quiet. We both stood frozen, barely breathing, as the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps grew closer. Each creak of the stairs felt like it was digging into my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I wanted to believe this was some cruel prank or my imagination playing tricks, but the look in her eyes told me otherwise.
"Don't make any noise,"
she mouthed, so softly I barely caught it. I nodded, gripping her hand tightly as my own fear mirrored hers. The footsteps stopped just outside the laundry room door, and a shadow moved beneath the doorframe. My blood turned to ice.
"Emma,"
the voice called again, soft and sweet this time. It was the same voice as before Mom's voice, but something about it was wrong. The tone now was too perfect that it was scary, too practiced. It sent chills down my spine. I clutched Mom's arm, my nails digging into her skin as the voice called again, this time closer. The shadow beneath the door shifted slightly, as if it were leaning toward the room. The voice, still eerily sweet, repeated my name, stretching it out like a lullaby. But then a sound followed a quiet, deliberate sniffing. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but as it grew louder, it was unmistakable. Whatever it was searching for me. Then came the footsteps. Light at first, so faint they were almost graceful. They moved down the hallway past my door as if whoever or whatever was walking on the very tips of its toes. But then the sound shifted, growing heavier. Each step now thudded against the floor with unnatural weight, rattling the pictures on the walls. The footsteps paused outside my room. My stomach churned as I realized it was searching for me there. I imagined it stepping into my bedroom, its voice still calling my name in that sickly sweet tone, its too perfect mimicry twisting into something worse. My mom's grip on me tightened as if she could feel my thoughts. The faint sniffing started again, followed by a soft creak as my bedroom door swung open. "Emma," it crooned, but now the sweetness was unraveling, turning sour, each syllable dripping with malice. My room fell silent. I imagined it standing in the center, scanning every corner, every shadow for me. The silence didn't last long. A guttural growl rumbled through the house, low and resonant, shaking the walls. My mom held me tightly, her breathing shallow, as we both stared at the door in terror. The growl twisted, climbing into an eerie, animalistic screech, each note higher and more distorted than the last. It pierced my ears and rattled my teeth, making me feel as though my very bones were trembling. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, a noise so wrong it felt as if it could rip reality apart. Then it became silent, too quiet that made me and my mother feel confused and become more frightened. The silence didn't last long. A guttural growl rumbled through the house, low and resonant, shaking the walls. Mom held me tightly, her breathing shallow as we both stared at the door in terror. The growl twisted into an eerie, animalistic screech that climbed higher and more distorted with each note. It pierced my ears, rattling my teeth, making me feel as though my bones were trembling. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a sound so wrong it felt like it could rip reality apart. And then it changed. At first, it was subtle, a soft, wet sound, like something shifting in the darkness. The screeching began, but now there was a strange squelching noise mixed in. Something was growing, stretching, reshaping itself like it was trying to break its shell. The sound was thick, as though skin was stretching over jagged bones, shifting in unnatural ways. Mom's grip on my hand tightened, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. I could feel her pulse racing under my fingers, matching mine. The noises grew louder, more frantic, as if the creature was struggling to change its form, to fit into something that was never meant to exist. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the sound of twisting, cracking joints. Something heavy was crawling on all fours, dragging itself across the floor scrape, scrape its movements erratic and jagged, like claws scraping on tile. Then came the hissing. It wasn't the hiss of a snake, it was deeper, more guttural, like a low, wet breath exhaled through a throat too tight for air. The hiss sounded like it was coming from multiple directions at once, swirling around the room, taunting us. It felt like the creature was right there with us, inside the walls, inside the house, moving so quickly that it was impossible to know where it would strike next. There was a sharp crack, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large and heavy shifting in place. I heard the snap of bone breaking and the sickening pop of something twisting into place. Thump, 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 the sound of its feet on the floor was getting closer, too close. I could hear its breath, ragged and uneven, in between the growing sound of its footsteps. It was right outside the door. It knew we were here. It was waiting. Mom's breathing was shallow now, almost inaudible against the cacophony of noise outside. She held me so tightly, I could barely move, and yet I felt her body trembling with a fear I couldn't begin to understand. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I knew she was hearing it too. The transformation was complete. It was no longer pretending to be a human. This monster had been tired of searching for us, and it began to hunt us. The sound of destruction followed. My heart stopped as a sharp crack echoed through the house. It was in the living room now, smashing through furniture, its rage uncontained. Splintering wood and shattering glass filled the air, each crash louder and more violent than the one before. Whatever it was furious, and it knew I wasn't where it had expected me to be. I buried my face in Mom's shoulder, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She held me tightly, whispering words of comfort I could barely hear over the chaos outside. The screeching returned, climbing into a cacophony of shrill, distorted notes that seemed to claw at the edges of my mind. I could feel it everywhere in my chest, in my head, in the marrow of my bones.
It didn't stop there.
Something enormous slammed into the wall, sending a shudder through the house. A deafening crash followed, like a door being torn off its hinges. Then another sound, heavy breathing, deep and ragged, echoing through the space just beyond the laundry room door. The doorknob rattled. I froze, gripping my mom's arm so tightly I thought I'd crush it. For a brief, horrifying moment, I thought it would come in. But the rattling stopped, and the sound of those monstrous footsteps moved away. It didn't leave, though. Instead, it resumed its rampage. The destruction continued, the sounds of its anger reverberating through every corner of the house. It wasn't until dawn began to filter through the cracks in the laundry room door that the noise finally stopped. A heavy, unnatural silence fell over the house, broken only by the faint creaking of the floorboards. We didn't move. The air still felt charged, thick with a presence that didn't belong.
Stay here,
Mom said, her voice shaking. She stood and cracked the door open, peeking into the hallway. After a moment, she gestured for me to follow. Stay here, Mom said, her voice shaking. She stood and cracked the door open, peeking into the hallway. After a moment, she gestured for me to follow. The house was unrecognizable. The walls were gouged with deep, jagged marks. The living room looked like a hurricane had torn through it, furniture reduced to splinters and cushions shredded. In the kitchen, the table was overturned, cabinets ripped from the walls, and broken dishes littered the floor. Mom pulled out her phone and called the police. When they arrived, we tried to explain what had happened, but how do you describe something like this? They looked around, frowning at the destruction, but their skepticism was clear.
Maybe it was an attempted robbery.
One of the officers said, though he didn't sound convinced. Another officer glanced at the claw marks on the walls, his face pale. They filed their report and left, advising us to stay elsewhere for the night. That's exactly what we did. Mom didn't even let me pack a bag. We left the house and never went back. Now we live in a different town in a small, quiet house on the edge of a cul-de-sac. It's nothing like the old house, and that's exactly what we wanted. At first, I had a hard time settling in. Every shadow in the corner, every sudden noise would send me into a spiral of panic. I couldn't help but wonder if I was still being followed by whatever that thing was. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sure that it was back. But as the weeks went on, the fear began to dull. Slowly, I learned to sleep through the nights again, to let myself feel normal. I started to paint again, too, pouring my feelings onto canvas instead of hiding them away. The colors flowed more easily now, as if the weight I had carried for so long had finally lifted, bit by bit. Mom doesn't talk about that night, and I've stopped asking. It's become something unspoken between us, an understanding, a mutual silence. Some things can't be explained. Some things you just survive, and somehow we've managed to survive this. The old house, the terror, the monster, they're a distant memory now, tucked away in a part of my mind that I don't visit often. Life here is slower, quieter, and in the end, that's all I can ask for.